Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Online Smicha. In this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayetze, we find when Yaakov Avinu leaves his father-in-law's home, his father-in-law Lavan's home. Lavan gives him a hard time, and twice we find a pasuk where Yaakov says the time that he spent working in his father-in-law's home. So in Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Lamed Ches, Yaakov says, Ze esrim shana anochi imach, I spent 20 years with you. In Pasuk Mem Aleph, he stresses it even more. He says, Ze li esrim shana beveisecha, I spent 20 years in your home. Avadeticha, I worked there. Arba Asrei Shana for 14 years, B'shnei b'nei secha, for your two daughters, and he elaborates how I literally lived in your home. For 20 years I lived in your home, and the time has come for me to move on and go elsewhere. Very nice. The problem is that there is a Gemara. The Gemara is in Masechta Kedushin, Daf Yud Beis, Amid Beis. And the introduction to this Gemara is, we all know that Chazal tell us that the Avos were Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula. Even though the Avos are before Matan Torah, the Avos were Mekayim all the laws of the Torah, and perhaps even the mitzvahs the Rabbanon. And I'm going to quote something that the Gemara says that the Rabbanon were careful not to do, and this is something that Rav had an issue with. The Gemara in Kedushin lists off things that Rav was very unhappy with people doing. For example, it says, Rav mangid alman de mekadesh b'shuka. If somebody would engage a woman, do the process of Kedushin b'shuka in a marketplace, Rav said that that's not the right way to do it. You do it in a modest way. Okay, so there's a couple of things that the Gemara lists off. But one of the things it clearly says, and it's mentioned in the Rambam too, in this list, is Rav was very angry. Mangid means he actually cursed. Somebody, al chasna dedayer bibei chamua, for a son-in-law that gets married and lives in his father-in-law's and his mother-in-law's home, Rav was very disappointed. Rav Mangid, he cursed. He felt that was not right for a newly married couple to live in a father-in-law, mother-in-law's house. And Rashi explains, what's the reason, what was wrong with this? It's not a din in the Torah. Says Rashi, Shema yikashel ba, we are afraid that the father-in-law, mother-in-law will get too comfortable with the young couple. Shestam chamoisa oiheves es chasana, because we know that mother-in-laws could get sometimes too close to their son-in-law, become too friendly, and you can never know what will happen. It's best if a newlywed couple moves on and builds up their own home elsewhere. So Rav was very not happy. Rav did not like if a newly married couple stays in their parents' home. So if the Gemara says that the Avos were Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula, and even mitzvahs the Rabbanon, how does it stem with this statement of Rav? So we find that this is a question that's discussed in some Svarim. And these are some of the answers that are mentioned. In one of the Svarim it's mentioned that, as Rashi just said, the main concern is that if there is a mother-in-law around, the mother-in-law sometimes becomes too friendly, loves her son-in-law so much that who knows what could happen. But in this case, we know Lavan's wife passed away already. Lavan's wife passed away, so perhaps in this case there wasn't any issue for Yaakov to live in the house of his father-in-law. Even though the pasuk seems to hint that Lavan eventually had more children, and Lavan obviously had children from other wives, but the halacha that Rav mentions that you're not allowed to live in the same home is only to live in the home of your mother-in-law. Not if your father-in-law marries a second wife, that doesn't apply. That is one answer. Another answer which is brought is, yes, the Avos were Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula, but the mitzvahs d'oraisa. Not necessarily they were Mekayim all mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. We say Eruv Tavshilin they were Mekayim. This one that's mentioned in the Gemara, this Chidush that Rav was concerned that a newly married couple shouldn't live by the father-in-law and mother-in-law, maybe that's something that wasn't important back then. Another answer which is given, based on the Shilas Tshuvas HaRamah, Siman Yud, that the klal, that the Avos were Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula, that's specifically by Avraham Avinu. Avraham Kiyim Kol HaTorah Kula, and all mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. Not necessarily it says the same thing about Yitzchak and Yaakov. Now another answer which is given, and this is something which is mentioned concerning another problem, another issue which comes up. For example, how did Yaakov marry two sisters, which is also Asur? So the Ramban answers that because Yaakov lived out of Eretz Yisrael, the Isser keeping Torah, Kol HaTorah Kula, was only in Eretz Yisrael. The Avos keeping Kol HaTorah Kula was in Eretz Yisrael. When they were out of Eretz Yisrael, they did not keep Kol HaTorah Kula. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh writes in Parshas Toldos that if they had any reason, the Heicha Dehoyaloi Eza Tzorech, if there was for whatever reason any benefit not to keep any mitzvah, they were able to deviate. And perhaps this was a reason for Yaakov. Yaakov had a reason why he had to stay there, to grow his mishpacha, so he was able to stay in the house of Lavan. This is Yaakov staying there. But now we have a practical halacha l'maisa shaila. How about today, us? If the Gemara says you shouldn't do it, what do we find? Why today do we find people do it? Do live in the homes of their father-in-law and mother-in-law. So the Tosfos, based on the Tosfos, some Achrayim say that the reason why we do find people allow it to happen is if you are able to gain financial profit from it, then you could stay. Even the chashash, as Rashi mentions, is you might create some too much of a friendship between the mother-in-law and the son-in-law. But if the young couple can't build up finances enough to rent their own apartment, and the reason why they're staying here is just to save a couple of months of rent, and this is the way they're building up their finances. So based on a Tosfos, it's mashma, the chashash of whatever pritzis might be falls off, because everybody understands that the savings of the money is the reason why they're staying here. They're trying to help them to build up their financing, and that is the heter why we find people do it. Even though many other achrayim say, how could a little challenge of money overlook the chashash of the pritzis? So obviously, if the money is available, yes, you gotta push them out. You gotta start your own life, find your own apartment. But if you feel they need the financial help, halachically they're allowed to stay in the house of the parents.